Welcome back, everybody. This is Garubis. Today we're going to be installing our GPU back into our computer, as well as integrating it into our existing water loop. Since I will be adding the additional heat coming off of my GPU into my existing water loop, I figured it was probably advantageous of me to also expand that to include additional cooling. So for that purpose, I have purchased the Alpha Cooling Nexus ST30 full copper radiator, as well as two 120mm Alpha Cool fans. I've also got here some additional fittings that will go on both the GPU as well as my new radiator. And since I'm going to be taking apart my water loop today anyways, I figured why not add a drain? Because as you're about to see, trying to empty my water loop without a drain is kind of a pain in the butt. So I've got some additional hardware here. I got a little ball valve here and a T-splitter and a couple other fittings that you'll find out about later that are going to help me add a drain to the system. So the first step in the process to get my GPU as well as my additional radiator installed into my case is going to be to empty our loop. So you may have noticed already that I've kind of done a little bit of prep work here. For starters, I have unplugged my pump. Luckily for me, I am using soft tubing, so that gives me the ability to kind of pull my pump out. So that should make it a little bit easier to empty the loop. I've also removed my two front fans. Swing that around so you can see that. So I've removed the front of my case, as well as I had two 140mm fans here in the front. And I've removed those to make space for the new radiator. The new radiator is going to go up here with the two 120 fans as an intake. And initially I had my pump mounted on top of an additional 120 fan here on the bottom, but that wouldn't allow my radiator to fit appropriately, so I went ahead and also removed this bottom fan here. So again, the first step in this process is going to be to remove the water from the system. Since I don't have an existing drain, hence me adding one with today's project, the best way to do it is using something like this, which is just a standard dish tub, nothing special about it. I'm going to take my water pump, which I have detached, like I said, from the case. I'm going to open it up, we're going to dump it out into this tub. And for the record, I have prepared the tub already by washing it out last night, because obviously there is additives in the fluids that are in the system. And I didn't want to contaminate because I will be reusing the fluids that come out. Okay. So here's our pump, now empty. Alright, and actually the recommended procedure, this is going to seem kind of weird, but the recommended procedure to get the rest of the fluid out of the system is to actually blow through the system. Okay, there you have it. That, I believe, is everything. There's no more, well, there's still liquid in here, obviously. I'm not going to ever be able to get 100% of it out of the system. But we have enough of it out that we can begin work. So, the order of my loop isn't going to change all that much. So as you can see now, it was coming from the pump, pumping into our 360mm radiator up on top. And I was coming out of that radiator, going to my CPU, out of my CPU, back to the inlet of the pump. So all we're going to do now is, instead of having it go from the pump straight to this radiator, it's going to go from the pump to my GPU. For my GPU, it's going to go up into the 360mm radiator at the top. It's going to come out of that radiator, go back to my CPU, out of my CPU up to my 120mm radiator here in the front of the case, and then from the 120mm radiator, it's going to go down into the inlet of my pump. So to do that, instead of coming from the GPU to the back of the radiator, I'm going to come from the GPU to the front, and then from the back, I'm going to come straight from the back straight into my CPU here. And to allow me to do that, I got a 90-degree fitting that I'm actually going to attach right here. And then, like I said, I am going to also add a drain to my system. And I'm going to attach the drain to my pump because that's the lowest point in the loop. So anytime you add a drain, you always want it to be at the lowest point of the loop. If there's anything lower than where your drain is, that loop fluid's not going to drain. The fluid's going to get stuck down in the bottom of the loop. So with that said, I'm going to get started and dismantle this, get all the tubes out of the way. And I'm actually going to remount my CPU block. There is a rubber gasket that goes on the back of the motherboard, and the rubber gasket is actually universal. It's meant to be able to be used with both the Intel mounting brackets as well as the AMD mounting brackets. And because of that, there's a little bit of extra rubber on there that I actually want to cut out. So I'm going to remove my CPU, I'm going to remove all the tubing, and then along with some tubes I had left over from the original installation, the original kit that I bought, I am going to get my CPU and my GPU both integrated in this loop. With that said, let's get started, because we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So I'm actually going to flip this upside down because as I remove these fittings, I want any possible remaining water to end up here in my radiator, because that's going to be my biggest reservoir as of right now. So, and as a precaution, anytime I remove a tube and I'm leaving it open, I'm going to take a little piece of paper towel and kind of roll it up and fit it in there so that, again, no water leaks, because water and electrical components don't mix. Currently making it look like my computer's got a bloody nose. That last fitting in here is a little tough to get to, so I'm actually going to go ahead and loosen up the screws that mount the radiator to my case back here, and so I can kind of lean this up a little bit and get this removed. Okay, so now with all those screws up here removed, I left one screw in the very bottom corner here, and that's just so when I move this, it doesn't completely come out, but it should leave me enough room to be able to kind of kitty this up or remove this up just enough for me to get this out of here, and it is. So as you can see now, all of my tubing has been removed. I got any areas that water has been running through, any fixtures here that was used for the water cooling. I have added the paper towels to prevent any remaining water that might be in here to leak out. So next, as I mentioned before, I am going to be removing my CPU block simply so that I can get to the back plate and clean up the rubber gasket. So let's get that removed now. Okay. Well, as you can see, the thermal paste application was done very well. But as you can see, when I went to unscrew here, the whole standoff came off with it. So that wasn't so great. Although we will be taking that off today anyway, so it's really no harm, no foul. So I can kind of show you now what I'm talking about with this rubber gasket. So you can see here around this metal here, we have these little flaps here that are kind of poking out, and well, they don't really cause any problems. They just kind of bother me, especially on this side, where you can see there's actually some pins here that it's laying on top of. So I really want to get those removed. So I'm going to pop out the rest of these standoffs and get that trimmed. And I don't want to lose these little washers here. Alright, looks like I got a little bit of thermal paste here on the motherboard, so I'm just going to clean that up real quick before I move on. There we go. That's cleaned up. So now I'm going to move this back up again and and take our back plate off. And you guys probably won't be able to see it on the camera. And I'm actually gonna lay this back down because this radiator is currently held in by one screw and I really don't want that falling. You probably can't see it, but you can see here where I can trim. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim that now. All right, and there we go, nice and trimmed up. So now we take our back plate and place it over the top. See, there's nothing, no flaps coming out the side. So I like that look a little bit better. So, very happy with that. Next, we're gonna clean our CPU. And there we go, nice and cleaned up. Got that Ryzen branding on there, if you can see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that reinstalled. And I did want to mention, it is imperative anytime you remove the cooler from your CPU that you do clean off all of the old thermal compound and replace it with fresh. You do not want to try to reuse any thermal compound. Okay, that's back in. Now that I have my CPU cleaned off, reinstalled, I'm gonna go ahead and get that back plate reinstalled. Most important parts here are, do not forget those little plastic washers that came off. Those are very important to prevent, again, anything from shorting out against the motherboard. Okay, so now that I have the 4 standoffs installed, I'm just going to tighten these down real good. Obviously this top one here on the original installation wasn't tightened quite enough because when I took the CPU block off, it came off with it, and it's not supposed to. So make sure these are tightened down good and tight. There we go. CPU block standoffs installed. All right, so now we're gonna clean off the bottom of our CPU block. And there we are, good as new, nice and clean. Reinstalling that backplate gasket was not the only reason that I opted to remove my CPU bracket, or CPU cooler. The other reason I wanted to remove my CPU block was because I'm actually going to be installing a 90-degree fitting on here to help routing of my tubes. So, if we take a look here in our case again, the way this is oriented is like this. Okay, but I want to be able to come from this back outlet here and come straight to this input on my CPU block. Well, with the soft tubing, I can't do that because if I bend it that tight of an angle, it's going to kink. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove this fitting and put a 90-degree fitting here. So I can come out here, go 90, and go straight up into my radiator. So the first step in that process is going to be to remove our existing fitting. So for that, we're going to need our Allen wrench that was provided. Loosen this fitting up. Comes right out, no problem. And then we're going to take one of our brand new 90-degree fittings and screw it in. Just like so. Now we will still need this because this end, as you can see, it just has the G1/4 threads there. So I'm going to go ahead and install this here. And voila. Now, when we install our CPU block, this will go here, and we can angle that right up, boom, boom. Easy connection. Now we're gonna go ahead and get this CPU block reinstalled. And first order of business, as always, is to apply our thermal paste. Get a nice little pea-sized blob on there. Get the correct orientation. And if you watched my previous videos, I always like to do a little pressure and slide it around just a little bit to make sure that thermal paste spreads out correctly. So now we'll take our 4 springs, one on each corner, and take our 4 caps, screw them on with doing the opposing corners simultaneously. And again, I think I mentioned it before that once these are all the way tightened down, there's no reason to apply any additional pressure to them because they are designed to fit. There's a stopping point and they won't tighten any farther. So once you hit that, you're good to go. So since to get to this back fitting here, I have to have my radiator loose, I'm gonna go ahead and get this tube installed and fitted now. That way I can actually reattach my top radiator and I won't have to worry about it moving around while I work on everything else. And with this now installed, I'm going to go ahead and bolt down my radiator. Okay, and if some of you have been following along, you might notice this fan looks a little different than the other ones. The reason for that is the heat sink on my VRMs on my motherboard was actually getting in the way of me installing a full 120 millimeter fan. So I went ahead and got it's actually only 15 millimeters thick, and it fits up underneath, or above, I guess in this case, the VRMs on my motherboard. So that's why this fan looks a little bit different, but I'd rather have a fan here that's a little bit thinner, maybe not as efficient, than have no fan at all. And if any of you are curious, the paper towels are actually getting wet. I actually think I'm going to go ahead and replace this one because it is quite damp. All right. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to get my GPU installed, and then I'm going to move on and get my front radiator installed, and that should allow us to get a pretty good idea of how we want our water loop to run, and I'll kind of go over it with you guys again. Okay, so you can see here we got our graphics card installed, and this here is actually an RGB header so that this will light up RGB. The RGB header for my motherboard is down here on the bottom. I'm going to see if I can actually route this back behind and have it come out underneath here so that I can get a little bit of a cleaner cable management instead of just plopping it over the top. There we go. That's much cleaner. That way we don't have a cable just running haphazardly around our case. Now that our GPU is installed, I'm going to go ahead and get that 120 millimeter radiator installed in the front here. So to do that, we need our radiator. There we go. The hardware that goes with it, and our two 120 millimeter fans. So the first thing we're actually going to do is we have some brand new fittings that we're going to install on the radiator. Probably easier to go ahead and do that now than to try and add it on later, after the radiator is installed. That started, thread it in, boom, 1 and 2. Then we got our big old Allen wrench here to just make sure it's tightened down enough that the O-ring gets compressed. So there's one. But you don't want to over tighten because obviously you could damage the threads. So just get it good and tight, call it a day. So there we go, a couple of fittings installed right there. So now the way I want to install this is obviously the fittings are going to go towards the inside of my case, and the fans are going to go on the outside. Just slide our radiator right behind here. Hopefully you guys can see that all right. In the hardware box that came with our radiator, we have some screws. Okay, so to attach our fans, we're actually going to use they sent some 30 millimeter screws here. We're going to use those to go through our fan. Again, we're going to actually have ours mounted like this, and I'm going to set it so that the cables can go out the back here for some cable management. So now we'll bring our radiator up, get the holes lined up, and we'll use the included Allen wrench here to get that started. There we go. Fans are installed on the front. Radiator is installed here on the inside of the case, in the front. We do also have to install some fittings on here as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. There we go. Now you can see we have our inlet and outlet for our GPU as well. And you can probably see that I've already installed the plugs here on the holes that we won't be using for our GPU. All right, so I think that is all the prep we can do on our case right now. What I'm gonna do next is actually work on my pump here and give you kind of an idea of what my plan is as far as adding a drain and doing all that kind of fun stuff. So let's get started on that. As I said before, since our pump is going to be going in the bottom of our case, or right over here, I can show you. So the pump is actually going to go right down in here. So that is going to be the lowest point in our water loop. So that is where we're going to install our drain. So as you can see here, we have our inlet and our outlet. And so we're actually going to come out of our front radiator, is going to come down, go in here. And then from here, we're gonna have a drain on our outlet port, and that's gonna go out a drain that goes straight out back, and then it's gonna go out to our GPU block. So first order of business, since we're gonna be adding a drain to this port right here, we need to remove the existing fitting. Okay, now let me show you what I got for this. So here is all the hardware that we have for our drain. So first order of business is we have what's called a male-to-male extender. So what this is going to do, this is actually going to go, if you guys want to take a look here, really not much to it, but it allows me to screw this in here. But what that allows me to do is add in a key component to this whole process, which is a T-splitter. So if you take a look there, you can see you got an inlet on that side, you got one on that side, and one on that side. So what we're going to do is I'm going to install that on here. I'm going to have one port going straight out the back. That's going to be where we're going to attach our drain. And then we're going to tighten this down. So, okay, so small change in plans. So originally I was gonna have my pump face the back and have the drain go out the back. But because the inlet and outlet ports, because of the side that they're on, it's actually gonna make our lives a lot easier to have the drain face the front. Luckily for the way my case is currently designed, there is no window down in the bottom corner where my pump is located. So it's not going to cause any kind of visibility issues where it might not look as nice because we have our drain sticking out the front. But it is going to allow a much easier outlet from that T-splitter up to my GPU, as well as make it easier to get our inlet coming out of our radiator. So that's going to be our plan. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to take another one of those, or male-to-male connectors, and we're going to put it right on the front of this T-splitter. Then onto there, we're going to attach the most important part of this, which is a ball valve. So this is going to screw onto here. And it looks like, of course, it's going to screw in upside down, but that's okay, because now the valve's on the bottom. But this is going to give us the ability to turn this on and off. So during normal functionality, we're going to have it closed, so no liquid can come out. But then when we want to drain our loop, we can attach a hose to here, put it into a bucket, and then just open this up. And everything will just come rushing out. So that'll make life a lot easier the next time we need to do any kind of maintenance or add any new components into our loop. We're also going to put a slightly different fitting on this other side here. We're going to put a 90-degree fitting so that we can have this face up. Because if you noticed in our case, the inlet and outlet of our radiator, our new radiator, is on the top. So that tube is going to have to come down. And again, if we try to come down and then go 90 degrees in with the tubing, it's going to kink and obviously no water is going to flow. So we got ourselves a 90-degree fitting to go there. So let's use our handy dandy Allen wrench here, the existing fitting removed. add ourselves 90. The nice thing about the 90 degrees fittings is they, even after they're tightened, they're designed with a swivel in them. So we can get that set to whatever angle we want. And then on the end of our 90, we're gonna put our fitting back on. And tighten it down with our Allen wrench. All right, and there it is. That is our new pump res combo. Looks quite interesting. Oh, sorry, there is one last piece, obviously, the actual outlet to the rest of our loop. We need to add a fitting here. And that's gonna go out to our GPU. So I think the next step now is to get this bad boy installed, and then we can, oh, one last piece, I almost forgot. Also very important, we have a plug. And this is gonna go as just added security on our drain to ensure that no water is going to leak out into our case. Here we go. We got a plug there, preventing anything from coming out that way. So let's get this pump installed in our case. Hey everyone, so sorry if you noticed kind of a weird cut there. The memory card on my camera filled up and I lost a little bit of footage. So in the interim, while I was copying everything off the memory card, cleaning up some space, I made a couple of changes and did a little bit of housekeeping behind the scenes. First major change is, if you can see here in the bottom of our case, I was able to get that 120 millimeter fan to fit underneath my pump. I like that for a couple of reasons. One, it adds a little bit of cooling for the motor on the bottom of the pump. And also it allows for more intake than exhaust, which keeps a positive case pressure, which should help minimize dust. Of course, you're not gonna ever be able to remove dust from the equation altogether, but anything that you can do to help, including cleaning out filters or anything like that, obviously you should take advantage of. So I was able to get that to fit back in there. I was able to mount my pump res combo to said fan, mount the fan into my case, and so when we are good to go there. The other thing that I did while we were waiting was to cut all of my tubing to length. So I'm gonna go ahead and install the tubes that I've cut into the case, explaining the flow for my loop, and hopefully give you guys a better understanding of how this is all gonna fit together. So the first length of tubing is actually gonna go from our outlet of our pump here up to the inlet for our graphics card. Okay, next we will go from the outlet of our graphics card up to, here, I don't know if you guys can see that very well, I apologize. So that's gonna go up to the inlet of our top radiator, so right there. So from there, we're gonna go from the outlet of our CPU cooler over to the inlet. Switch sides to this one. Over to the inlet of our 240 millimeter radiator in the front of our case that we just installed. Last but not least, we're gonna go outlet of our 240 millimeter radiator in the front of our case to the inlet of our pump. So, to kind of review the order of operations here. So we're gonna go out from our pump up to our GPU. GPU is gonna get cooled. It's gonna come out of our GPU into our 360 millimeter radiator on the top of our case. It's gonna look through the radiator. It's gonna come out of our radiator into our CPU block. CPU is gonna get cooled. It's gonna come out of our CPU. It's gonna come into our 240 millimeter radiator here, mounted in the front of our case. It's gonna come out of the 240 millimeter radiator and back down into our pump. And that is our new water cooling loop. So I did want to show you guys how my drain is going to work, because I think it's pretty slick. So obviously we have our ball valve here that will open and close, and as I showed you earlier, we do have a little plug here to prevent any leaks in case that ball valve goes bad or something. So next time if I want to drain my loop, all I'll need to do is loosen up the plug. Move that. I actually have an extra piece of tubing here with a quarter fitting already on the end of it. So then what I do is I take this, screw that into the drain, and then flip our ball valve. Pop up. Now all the water from the system is going to come out of here. Open up the cap here, and everything should just drain out. Now obviously that's not going to get 100% of the liquid out of there, because again, there's always going to be a little bit of water trapped in our radiators or CPU block or pretty much anywhere in the system. There could be a little bit of additional water in there, but sure is going to get about 90+% of the water out of the system, 95+% of the water out of the system without me having to mess with anything other than a plug, a ball valve, and screwing on this piece of cable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all these connections here, and I just realized this one's on backwards, and I'm going to screw all these fittings down to make sure we got a nice watertight seal all the way around. And there's our loop, all tightened up, ready to go. I've double checked every single connection. We are tight, hopefully watertight. And next step, I'm gonna do a little bit of cable management on the back side of the case here, just to get all the cables, all the power cables for the fans, for the PWM pump, and everything like that. We're gonna get that all set up and ready to go. And once that is ready to go, we're gonna start doing some leak testing. So hang tight, guys, and I'll see you in just a second. All right, so we have finished tightening down all of our connectors, as I mentioned before, and I've now finished all of my cable management. So everything's looking pretty clean in there. Everything's kind of organized as best as I can. This case is not the best for cable management because there's a lot of open area down in here, but I think I've done a pretty good job getting everything cleaned up and organized. So all that's left now is to fill the loop and do a leak test and make sure everything is watertight. So I don't know if you guys can see it over here on the side, I have a separate power supply hooked up that is connected and powering the pump. That way if there is a leak, it shouldn't damage anything. Stuff will get wet, sure, but since there's no current running through it, it shouldn't damage it, and as long as we allow everything ample time to dry out, it should work next time we power it on. So that is the safest and the recommended way to fill and test your loop. So with that, I got my trusty funnel here and my mixture of the concentrate that came with the kit originally mixed with distilled water. And actually a good portion of this is the water that originally came out of our system earlier today. So with that, there is no time like the present. It's very important that you do not let the water pump actually run dry. You do not want it to run without any liquid in there. So what we'll do is we'll fill up the reservoir. So as you can see, there's liquid in here, and what I'm going to do is I'll switch on my power supply real quick, let that water run through, and then power it off. Okay, and I'll turn it off before I allow it to run at all without any liquid in there. So we'll do it again, we'll fill it up. Alright, now I'm going to just keep repeating that process until I see water actually start cycling through the system. And all the while keep an eye out, make sure I don't see any leaks or anything anywhere, which currently I don't. There we go. I'm gonna top this off. Okay, now we just keep an eye out for any leaks. And as you'll see, you can see some stuff bubbling up there as the water leaves the system. Let me tell you, so far so good. Once you put the top on, which I'm going to do now, then what you can do and slowly, let's just kind of tilt this back, and you can even hear it. There's air slowly worked out of the system. There you have it, folks. This is my new loop. the new GPU water block. So I'm gonna let this run. They recommend letting it run for about 24 hours. So I'm gonna let this run for a while. Keep my eye on it, check back, see if there's any leaks. And assuming everything works out well, which I'm pretty confident it will, as it worked out pretty well last time when I installed this originally, we can get this thing hooked up, set up, and get back to work, and get back to fun and games, which is what this thing's all about. So, see y'all in the next video.